Okay, Bezras Hashem, tonight's Parsha shir is going to be in the schus of the Refuah Shalema for Yosef ben Reka and all of the Jewish brothers and sisters in Ukraine, in the world, everybody. And everybody should have a Refuah Shalema, Refuah Sanefesh, Refuah Saguf, a bracha of Shalom. And Bezras Hashem, living with the Parsha just a little bit, should be ma'orer us to do tshuva a little bit, to return a little bit closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to move a little bit more forward with the parsha. So in this week's parsha, the culmination, the ending of Sefer Shemos, the ending of the book of exile and redemption, the book of the story of the Jewish people as a nation, entering into Mitzrayim, ascending out of Mitzrayim, ascending up Har Sinai, descending into the Egel HaZahav, discovering the secret of redemption within brokenness, all of the different elements of Sefer Shemos. We come to the end, which is the culmination of the Mishkan, which is the place where the Shekhinah HaKadosh is going to rest, where the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives, in our minds, in reality, our stubborn faith that has the capacity to continue to believe with the deepest emunah imaginable that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence saturates all things, that place of Hashra'ah, that place of a silent unity between the upper realm and the lower realm, between the connection between Shemayim and Aretz, what Chazal described based on the Pasuk as Yom Nashak, a day of kissing, a day of connectivity, a day of weaponry as well. Chazal already say that the inyan of Milchama and weaponry is associated with that day of the kissing of Shemayim and Aretz. Like Chazal tell us, the Medrash and all of the tzaddikim are repeating over and over that when a person sees nations at war, one of the elements that a person can utilize for themselves, because as Rabbi Nachman tells us, one of the things we can utilize for ourselves, before I go to what Rabbi Nachman tells us, is to be mitzapeh to Raglei Mashiach, is for a person to anticipate the coming of Mashiach. That when there's a hisayrus of milchama, like the tzaddikim say, like Rav Kook points out, and like all of the tzaddikim point out, when there's a hisayrus of milchama in the world, what it means is that it's a time ra'ui, that unsettledness, that chaos, that destruction, forces a person to desire Mashiach more. Person who never even thinks about Mashiach, a person who, yes, we know a makif of Mashiach, we have an idea of Mashiach, but we never think about Mashiach. And we never believe in the possibility of Mashiach. And in a time of Milchama, instead, or along with, on a certain spiritual sense, a person, instead of being overwhelmed by the outside world of the Milchama, they should turn inwards and begin to be mitzapeh Mashiach, to anticipate the legs, the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Now we know that from all of the tzaddikim we know, from the Morinayim we know, from the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh we know, from the Vilna Gaon we know, from all of the tzaddikim we know, that there's Mashiach Klali, there's the general arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu, which will be the political, historical, eschatological end of history and the redemption of history, which the Rambam brings down the halacha that a person has to believe in and anticipate. And different tzaddikim throughout the generations have forced us to properly understand these ideas, especially the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, Schlusi Yogan Aleinu, that we want Mashiach now, that this is a fundamental element of what it means to be a Jewish person, to quite literally expect and demand with urgency, beyond urgency, to demand the arrival of Mashiach. But that I could only speak for myself. That's a foreign, that's a vada, that's a makif. A person has to have that emuna, and it's an emuna. But I can't say that I believe. I can't say that I'm mitzapeh b'chol yom that Mashiach should come. A vada comes. Chazal Baruch Hashem tell us that Mashiach comes behesach hadas. And so for those of us oizvek here, who are so lost and have no capacity to remember to focus on the coming of Mashiach, and for good reason, for infinite amounts of reasons, at least we know the statement of Chazal that it comes behesach hadas. It comes behesach hadas. It comes in a door that is not only kulo chayev or kulo zakai, but a door of kulo chayev and kulo zakai bevasachas at the same time. But it comes behesach hadas. And even in that regard, there's a Chassam Sofer, Schlusi Yogan Aleinu, the Chassam Sofer, Tzaddik Yesod Olam, the great grandfather, or many greats of Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita. The Chassam Sofer says in the last tshuva in Yeridea, and again, Yeridea is also the end of Sefer Shemos, because like we spoke about last week, the Das of Moshe is what directs the Jewish people throughout the Midbar. And it's what draws us into the place of Mashiach, Yeridea, the capacity for a person to open up that Nakud of Das, that Nakud of Mashiach, of Moshe within themselves. And the end of Yeridea is also Shaykh to Parshas Pekudei, which is the end of Sefer Hagula, the end of Sefer Shemos. The last tshuva, the Chassam Sofer, is not taking issue, but discussing the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amuna from the Rambam. And the Chassam Sofer, Zchusi Hagan Aleinu, after discussing and saying what he had to say about the Yud Gimel Ikrim, or the concept of a Yud Gimel Ikrim from anybody, the Chassam Sofer says, and he ends his discussion, he says, nevertheless, this is not in terms of the content of the Ikrim that my question is about, because the content of the Ikrim is essential, and it's understandable, and it's true that a Jewish person has to believe this in every moment. He says, the only Ikr that I slightly disagree with, or that I don't think you can claim as an Iker, is the Emunah in Vias HaMashiach. And the Chassam Sofer says, because let's say Mashiach doesn't arrive. I mean, it's a tautological trick, because a person can never quite say that Mashiach hasn't arrived, because Mashiach is always about to arrive. It's an aspect of waiting until it has a chadas. But he says that there are shitos in Chazal that say Mashiach is not going to come for the Jewish people. And if Mashiach doesn't come, so would one iota of Torah observance and experience change? No, nothing would change. We're not Oived Amanas L'Kabel Pras. We don't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to receive a reward, in order to receive that which we desire to receive. And then the Chassam Sofer brings it back and is matakin the entire thing. Not matakin, it wasn't makukul, but reveals the deepest vort, where he says, but once Chazal have accepted and take it for granted that Mashiach is going to come for the Jewish people, to believe in Mashiach is no longer about believing in Mashiach, it's about believing in the tradition that says Mashiach is going to come. And that's the Das of Moshe, that's the Yeridea. And so that inyan of Mashiach HaKlali, which we're all waiting for and we're all anticipating, and yes, we want and we anticipate, and in the end of the day, the Jewish people in the world is ready to toss away all of the Eglei HaZahav that we collect before Mashiach. And then in the deepest drives and the desire of each person in the Yechidah Shabanefesh, when they're living on a Thursday night, at the end of a Parsha of Shemos and a Zman of Hisairus and Melchama and all of these different things, that a person has to be mitzapeh levias HaMashiach. Person has to be mitzapeh levias HaMashiach. And the way that we do that, if we don't have access, if we can't remember that collective Mashiach, our tzaddikim tell us that there's also an inner Mashiach. There's also a Mashiach prati. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says that what we say in L'Chadodi on Friday night davening, when the world is fixed, when Mashiach comes, is we say, Karve el nafshi giyala, that my Redeemer, redemption should come close to my heart. And what the Baal Shem Tov and all of the tzaddikim based on the Zohar HaKadosh tell us is that what that means is that each and every person has their own geula pratis, each and every person has their own personal, subjective redemption each and every day, each and every moment if possible, each and every moment if aware, each and every moment if a person understood that via Mashiach in their lives, they would say Birchas HaGomel every second of their lives. Because the Geula HaPratis is being saved, it's being elevated out of a scenario that we didn't even know we needed to be elevated from. It's simply the light of Shabbos, that Geula Pratis, that opening of the soul that allows me to just care a little bit less. To care a little bit less, to look inwards a little bit more, to be mitzapeh to good in my life, in the world in general, to daven and to do every single thing a person has to do with regards to the chitzonius ha'olam, but also to be able to close one's eyes to the distractions and mitzias of this world. Listo mesa'einin mechez yedaheh alma, to close the eyes off from the noise and the terrifying noise, the kol hamona sharomi, that voice that emerges and emanates from Rome, the heart of Rome, and and it deafens everything. It deafens the Hirhure Tshuva, it deafens the Hirhure Shira. Vias HaMashiach HaPrati is the silencing of that noise and the allowance to allow our Nigun HaPanimi to play, our innermost tune, which is the tune of Vias HaMashiach. That song, that Nigun of La'ased Lavo, that Mashiach sings of Geula Pratis, of personal redemption, when I elevate myself out of darkness for a moment and to choose to see good, that's also via Mashiach. And it's pashut based on what we said, I believe it was last week, with regards to the Das of Moshe, that the Mori Naim says we don't know where Moshe is buried because Moshe is buried in each and every one of us. And we know that Moshe and the Inyan of Mashiach is one and the same. It's Mashahaya Hu Sheyihiyah. That the Ma'amarim that the Rebbe Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern Shlita points out on this Inyan of Moshe and Mashiach based on the Mittler Rebbe in the second volume of Taras Chaim, in Parsha Shmos and Beshalach, with regards to the distinctions between Moshe and Mashiach and how they're two expressions of a singular thing. We all have a chilek of Moshe, so we all have a chilek of Mashiach. Mashiach is das, Mashiach is awareness, and that Gula HaPratis is what comes to us when there's a Milchama in the world. In this week's Parsha, we see the culmination of the Mishkan, drawing down the Mishkan, Hashras HaShechina, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Geula HaPratis in our lives. And we're told in a repeated fashion that it was made by two individuals. It was made by Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur Lamati Yehuda Asa Es Kol Asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. It was Betzalel, the son of Uri, who was the son of Chur, who came from the line of Yehuda. That line of Malchus, that line of David Malka Mashiach, of success and Avodas Hashem, of majesty, of a control, of power, which is rooted in the deepest emunah. But Yehuda is the Ani HaGever. I can stand up in front of Yosef and shatter his teeth if I need to, with my cry, with my single Gur Aryeh, with that lion and that force of Klal Yisrael and Kedusha and emunah. That's the Koyach of Yehuda. That's where Betzalel comes from. V'ito ahaliyav ben achisamach lamata dan charish v'choshev v'roikim b'tchelis bagman telas hasheni ubashesh. Mamish, a pasuk from the Megillah. It's a Megillah's Esther pasuk. V'ito ahaliyav, which is the aspect of Dan, which is the aspect of Mordechai and Esther, as we're going to see. Shevet of Binyamin. Ben achisamach Lamata Dan charish v'choshev v'roikim b'tchelis bagman telas hasheni ubashesh. All of the beautiful different garments. All of the levush malchus, the tchelas, that ish Yehudi haya b'shushan habira, that koyach of matadan. But matadan is the opposite of Yehuda. Dan is broken down. Dan is the lowest of the shvatim. Dan is the lowest of the shvatim. Dan is the one who leaves Mitzrayim with Pesalach on them, with Avodah Zarah, unable to let go of that foreign connection, that addiction, that space of chametz that needs to be let go of. Dan, we're told, is the lowest of the Shvatim, emerging from Bilha, emerging from a place that even Yaakov Avinu didn't necessarily have the intention, Kavyachol, to bring light out from. And Dan, we're told, were the Palte Ha'anan. Dan, we're told, were the Ma'asef HaMachane, when the Jewish people were traveling through the desert, surrounded by Anane HaKavod, surrounded by that Anan that descends into the Mishkan at the end of this week's Parsha, reminding us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us at every moment of our lives, that Hashra in each and every one of our lives, that cloud, that Arfel that Moshe Rabbeinu encountered when he was on Har Sinai, that his galus of Kavod, those levushim, those ways of being toifes, of grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Kedusha and Shalom in our lives. Ma'asif l'chol ha'machanos, Dan is the furthest. Dan is the most despised. Dan is in fact spit out from the Anan. Dan is attacked by Amalek by being kicked out of the Anan. Hanechashalim acharecha, those who were weak in back of you. Dan are referred to as Polte Ha'anan, the excess, that which was cast away from the protection of Anane HaKavod. Dan is that place of din, it's a place of judgment, it's a place of lowness. But Dan, we're told, also gets a bracha. You're going to be like a snake on the path. You're going to fix the snake on the path. You're going to terrify that path, that darkness in the world. And the bracha that Machane Dan gets, that Shevet Dan gets when Yaakov Avinu, Yisrael Saba, leaves this world, is Liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I have yearned for your salvation. I've yearned for it. Yearning, as we know already, only happens when a person doesn't have something. If I have it, there's no need to yearn. If I have it, there's no need to yearn. Machane Dan had so little, or they had lost so much, or they were so small in their own eyes and in Metzius, that they had nothing. They had nothing of themselves. They were the Polte Ha'anan. Liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem. That bracha that Yaakov Avinu, Yisrael Saba, gives to Dan is the bracha of yearning because you're mechusar. And Dan has the deepest koach in the world. Because Dan is makir, because Dan feels spit out at certain points of that cloud, Dan also has the koach to be the ma'asif l'chol ha'machanos, to collect all of the lost objects. Dan has the ability to elevate that which seemed insignificant and unworthy and despised in the eyes of the builders, is in truth the Rosh Pinah, is in truth the most beautiful thing, that stone of Dan, that despised stone, that the generation of Dan, Machane Dan, because they descended, because they fell, because they acknowledged their fall, unlike that Yehuda space, unlike Betzalel, they were also able to collect the lost pieces. The pieces that had fallen away, they were already lost. There was a sense of avdon. There was a sense of kasha, avadati, avadati. That place of Dan, lishuascha kivisi Hashem, towards your salvation I have yearned, that koyach of kivoy. Rashi HaKadosh tells us that what Yaakov Avinu saw was the neshama of Shimshon Hagibor, who was meant to be Mashiach. There was an aspect of Mashiach associated with Dan. And so what we see is that the Mishkan itself, the dwelling place for the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the culmination. That place of the cloud and its presence protecting us. That place was architected and built by two individuals, two archetypal models of Jewish spirit and two aspects of the self. The aspect of Yehuda and the aspect of Dan. The Zohar HaKadosh says, Chazal tell us that here we have a unification between the highest level and the lowest level. Of Dan, of Betzalel, who has his stuff together, of Yehuda rather, Yehuda, Betzalel, who has his stuff together, and then there's Dan, and then there's Ohaliav. And that unity is necessary for the building of the Mishkan. A person has to have their stuff together and not have their stuff together at the same time. A person has to be capable of ascending into the place of Yehuda mindset and descending into the place of Dan mindset. Of running and returning, of finding a Kadosh Baruch in the light and finding a Kadosh Baruch in the darkness. Dan is spit out. We're attacked by Amalek. There's an aspect of us in every one of our experiences that is attacked by Amalek. Amalek is hoylech achar hanachashalim acharecha, those who are weakened, those who are impoverished, those who it's not even their fault. And that's who Amalek attacks. And it's specifically there that the chiluk of Dan within us has the capacity of being mevatel, the shame of Amalek, of erasing Amalek from within, of battling Amalek. You need that in the binyan of the Mishkan as well. The binyan of the Mishkan, the hashra of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives, can't only be in the Yehuda moments. It can't be when it's a Betzalel experience who has that artistry and that precision. Sometimes it's going to be in the time of that Dan who's Shimshon, a failed Messiah, a Mashiach that didn't make it. But chas v'shalom, to think that it was a failed Mashiach, it was Makayim what it needed to be Makayim in its very failure, because everything is Mashiach. Shimshon is not a failure. Shimshon's inyan is to be Megala liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem. And if the entire concept of Dan is liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem, I'm yearning for something, then Dan can quite literally never win, because to win would be to reverse the joy that one finds in accepting that I can't win. That avodah of Dan, that's makabel everything, that collects the lost objects and returns them. The place that tzaddikim know, where when you're by the tzaddik, when you're by the kever of a tzaddik, in particular the Rabbeinu Nachman ben Fega, Nachal Nevei Makar Chachma, who's in Uman and in Yerushalayim, but in Uman, that place where a person goes to retrieve their lost objects, the tzaddik says. That a person connects themselves to Kedusha, not because they want to necessarily get better or develop more that they have never tasted in their lives. The secret is to, how do I learn what I've lost? That's the avoid of the tzaddik. The avoid of the tzaddik is to tell you still have it, you've just lost it. You've always had it. That place of Uman, that place of Dan is Yeshuascha Kivisi Hashem. It's Baruch Hashemesh, like Shimshon. It's a place where I have the ability to uncover HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well in my life. In that place of Dan, in that place of Oaliyav. Now we know that Amalek attacks the nation of Dan. Amalek attacks over there. And the reason that Amalek attacks over there is because Amalek, and as we've seen, every person has their description. Every tzaddik has their description of Amalek. Some tzaddikim, like the tzaddik Rav Tzaddik HaKohen Melublin, has a million explanations of Amalek, because it came from the Meshiloach, who saw Amalek as the inverse response towards a movement towards Kedusha in one's life. The shadow awareness of the fact that at the moment that I decide to try and get better in my life, to do something good in my life, to uncover light in my life, at that moment there is going to be an equal amount of resistance. Because in truth, they're not two separate things, because Amalek doesn't exist, as we're going to see. The notion of Amalek is just the dredges of Kedusha. It's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in this world at the lowest imaginable possible place. And that koyach of Amalek to attack at Dan is because Dan is just the lowest place. They're the Poltei Anan. They're the ones who are most susceptible to feeling that, to feeling what spiritual resistance feels like. That spiritual resistance, that darkening that emerges within a person's mind, not darkening chas v'shalom, that resistance, that mania, that is born at the very same moment that a gesture, a movement towards Kedusha emerges in one's life. Dan feels that, and Dan is able to fight it. Dan is able to be metakin that. And again, what we haven't said yet, I mean, in my mind, our tzaddikim tell us that our generation is Machane Dan, that Machane Dan is our generation. We are the Poltei Ha'anan, that is us. We are the ones who are living in the secret of Yeshuascha Kivisi Hashem, that all I can do is yearn for your salvation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The tzaddik, the Ramchal, and his Talmidim, Rav Moshe David Valley, and the Chavraya Kadisha of Padua, the Ramchal and his Chavrayev, who brought Mashiach also. That was a moment of Mashiach. Mesilas Yesharim is a book of Mashiach. When a person learns Mesilas Yesharim and understands that the tachlis in this world is to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's Vias HaMashiach in a person's life. That's the path. That's 26 steps of Shem Havaya, the 26 chapters. Mesilas Yesharim was written in when the Ramchal was accused of the worst imaginable things towards the end of his short but impossible life. And the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, Zchus Yogan Aleinu, someone who spoke more about Mashiach than anybody. The Ramchal laid out a path for us. He laid out a path of grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wrote Mesilas Yesharim when he was attacked, when he threw all of his books away, when he was forced into exile and excommunication. It was specifically there where it was baseless attacks. It was the Metzias of the world. He understood that this is how Kadosh Baruch Hu fears the Welt right now. He realized it wasn't about any other people. It was specifically there in that dark place, so to speak, in the Ramchal's world, that the Ramchal gave us Mesilas Yesharim. The Ramchal's letters from that time are all about Rabbi Akiva. They're all about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, who understood the secret of Gam Zu L'Toiva, who understood the secret of everything is for the good. Everything, Gam Zu L'Toiva, Gam Charvoina Zachar Latov. Gam Charvoina Zachar Latov, even the Churbanos are Zachar Latov. That koyach of a tzaddik to see destruction and to be mamtik it. This avodah of Dan this avodah of Dan. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But Amalek attacks Dan. Amalek attacks Dan in that place, and the job is to. I'm sorry. Baruch Hashem. The Ramchal gives us Mesilas Yesharim in that dark place in his life. The Ramchal gives us Mesilas Yesharim. The Ramchal offered other Svarim as well. The Ramchal wrote a sefer called Taktu Tfilos, 515 Tfilos, which is the gematria of Ve'eschanan, Vani Tfila, like Moshe Rabbeinu, Raya Mehem Nadav, in 515 Tfilos before going in or trying to get into Eretz Yisrael. And every one of the Tfilos that the Ramchal wrote ends with the pasuk L'Yeshuascha Kivisi Hashem. Every single one. Not a single one does not end with that stamp of L'Yeshuascha Kivisi Hashem. That all it can do is yearn. And the Ramchal has a drush which we've learned together before called drush HaKivui, which is all about ultimately how the only spiritual thing a person can do in life is to yearn for salvation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is to live in that midah of Dan, is to live in that place of holding on to the belief, the undying belief, and the hope and the kivui, which again always emerges from a place of distance. That kivui is all we have when it comes to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the koyach of Dan, and Dan also has to build. Dan also has to be a part of our lives. And Amalek attacks there. So what's Amalek? So there's a lot of Amaleks. Rabbi Nachman Schusay Yogan Aleinu says, in the 19th teaching in the second volume of Likutei Moharan, that Amalek is the Sofei Tevos of Sheva Yipol HaTzadik V'kam. That the tzaddik falls down 7 times and he gets up. And the context of the Torah over there is essential. Obviously, it's about how one breaks the head of the snake, ultimately with that stone of Emunah. The only way to fix that impurity that shows itself in the world at various points, like the Vilna Gaon tells us that the snake and the Nachash and Meitzafa Yetzeh Nachash and Tzafa, which is gematria Amalek, comes from within the Nachash. There's an element of that Metzius coming about again. There's like a bump in the grid of quantum reality that gives birth to this type of snake showing itself. And as the Safra Ditzniusa tells us, the Vilna Gaon writes, all of this is obviously b'derech efshar, because the learning about Mashiach is always about a learning of Mashiach prati. It's a question of how do I bring Mashiach for myself? But that snake that shows itself, once in a while, it is broken with that stone of Dan, with that stone of Emunah, of Kivui. And so Amalek makes you fall. It shows a person that I can think good, I can try, I can take upon myself this or that. I can live with a sense of tamimus. I can live with a sense of tamimus even though I fall. Even though I fall. I fall, this world is falling, but I can see with eyes of tamimus, with calmness, that the fall is also part of the process. Kisheva yipol atzadik v'kam. Amalek tries to tell us that no, you fall, and it's a separation. What you did before the fall, what you do after the fall, those are all mikra. Those are all inessential. That is not the deepest expression of who you are. It's tangential to the essence of your soul, says Amalek. And when you fall, when you descend from what you wanted or what you expected or what you hoped for, or what you truly need to believe because it's the only medicine available, even though you fall from it, we'll go back to that point in a second. Amalek says that's the real you. That fall is the real you. That fall is the real you, and you can't get back up. That's where Amalek hangs out. Amalek hangs out in the yeyush of it all, in the hopelessness of it all, in the perpetual repetition of the same of it all, of the overwhelmingness of it all, whatever that Nakuda is. Amalek says that's real. And the capacity of Dan to be mevatel the koyach of Amalek is to recognize that no, shavi yipol atzadik v'kam, that's the ikar kiyum of the tzaddik. That the falling is not incidental, the falling is not symptomatic, the falling is part of the Metzius. As we said, even Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't grasp the essence of Hashem. And as Rav Hutner says in his letter, a remarkable psychological, educational, redemptive letter, that someone who wrote to his Rebbe, Rav Yitzchak Hutner, complaining, crying, feeling low about themselves, judging themselves about their descent in spiritual whatever. It's an anonymous letter, and therefore it's for everybody. Rav Hutner says that Sheva Yipal Atzadik V'Kam, what Shlomo HaMelech says in Mishlei, a person typically thinks that it's a statement about the resiliency of the tzaddik. He falls 7 times. He descends into that pit of despair, into that place of fear, into that place of unconsciousness, of mindlessness, of anger, of lust, of jealousy, whatever it might be. And he's able to get up again, and therefore he's good. Says Rav Hutner in the name of Rav Tzadok, I believe anonymously. Rav Hutner didn't express exactly who he was quoting from, although it's known, because it was so saturated in his writings that he didn't have to express it. Rav Hutner says that it's not that in spite of the fall you still get up. It's because of the fall you get up. This is the tekuma. That's what life is. Life is ups and downs. And when a person sees that up and down, the peak and the valley, the strike and the gutter, the Rutz of Veshov, the Yehuda and the Dan, the Gullus and the Geula of our lives are both 2 elements of the same experience. And when a person realizes that, Ba Mashiach, that's Hashra Shashchin in a person's life. There's Hashra when I realize that everything is you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Amalek, that's how we're Mevatel Amalek. We make a psak din, and we say, no, everything is good. Of course, I still have to try, and this and that, and all of the halachos of what it means to be a human being on every level that a person's heart feels is necessary and valuable for themselves. That everything is good. That's the koyach to be mevatel Amalek, according on this teaching of Rabbi Nachman in the 19th teaching, that Amalek is the Sofei Tevos of Sheva Yipal Atzadik V'Kam. The Vilna Gaon, Schus Yagan Aleinu, in a sefer, it was published, and it was out of print for a long time, and it was republished, I believe, or is being republished, is Likutei Hagra. Likutei Hagra is an insanely potent sefer. It's just a very powerful book. And the book itself is very terse, but the commentary, the lengthy commentary by his Talmud, or the Talmud Muvhak of his Talmud Muvhak, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, who was a Talmud Muvhak of Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov. And tonight is, just to pause for a second, tonight is Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov's yard site. Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov was the Talmud Muvhak of the Vilna Gaon, spent 2 years face to face with the Vilna Gaon, not leaving his side, writing that the Vilna Gaon revealed to him things that one could not imagine, one could not believe. And then he decided, like anybody who spends time with the Vilna Gaon or a tzaddik, is that it was time to move to Eretz Yisrael, and he became one of the first oilim, the attempt to be mitalel Yerushalayim, to bring a chabura and a chavraya kadisha to Yerushalayim. And again, Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov, his teachings are singular, other than I believe the Ramchal and Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver in a certain way. But Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov is singular. We'll see this book. I've lived with this book, Mayim Adirim, which is a parish on the Idra Zuta from the Zohar Kadosh. And amazing about this book is that it has a haskama from the Divrei Chaim of Sanz. Or maybe it doesn't have haskama. Maybe the Masorah was that the Divrei Chaim of Sanz, who was not a student of the Vilna Gaon, would never allow this sefer to leave his desk, and that he would learn from it every day, which is obviously a tremendous kiyum in the yichud of 2 Torahs of the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov, which is a davar pashut. But they also say that really he thought it was Rav Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, the Vitebsker, who was a student of the Magid and a student of Baal Shem Tov, because they both have a vort in the beginning that says that the koiles that come from Har Sinai, you wouldn't believe, it's too amazing, that the koiles that come from Har Sinai are the hirhure tshuva that emerge within a person's heart every day when they're able to quiet down the noise of Rome for a second. And he knew that this was a teaching of Rav Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, And so he assumed that the Sefer was from Rav Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, from the light of Chassidus, and he kept it and he learned from it every day, the Divrei Chaim. But either way, Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov settled in Sfas, and learned with the Sardi Mekubalim over there, where a lot of the Masorah of the unity between the Rashash and his Talmidim and the Vilna Gaon and his Talmidim, to the extent that someone said, I believe it was in Abu Lafia, but of a later generation who were learning in Beit El, that he said that one who learns with the Vilna Gaon is learning with the Rashash. That one who learns the teachings of the Gra is also, and we know that the Rashash was learning the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov as well. So, but Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov was in Tzfas, and then he went to Yerushalayim, because there was a machlokas in Tzfas, and he went to Yerushalayim. And in Yerushalayim, he rented out a shul of none other than the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, which is another person, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, who was the nefesh of David, the nefesh of Mashiach, who Baal Shem Tov saw in a dream and understood that if I come to Eretz Yisrael, I'm going to bring Mashiach. And the Or HaChaim HaKadosh said, it depends, can you see my feet in the dream? And the Baal Shem Tov said, no, I can't. And this was a communication through the Baal Shem Tov's brother-in-law, Rav Gershon Kitver. And the Baal Shem Tov said, I can't. And he says, if you can't see my feet, then he shouldn't come. And obviously the Baal Shem Tov went on his journey to get to Eretz Yisrael, which is how we have the Maisa of Shvi Shal Pesach, where ultimately the Baal Shem Tov couldn't make it, but he remembered the Aleph Beis. And so in this base medrash of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov had his whole Chavraya Kadisha, and he's buried right next to the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Now, there was a Maisa where there was a tractor that was trying to, this is all from Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern Shlita, but it's the Tzaddik's Yartzeit. It's Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov, Schusi Yogan Aleinu's Yartzeit. And it should be a Melit Yosher for Klal Yisrael. It should be Mamtik, all of the dinim in the world of Menachem Mendel, of Menachem and Nechama, and that Or of Shklov. And so they were trying to raise on some level, like the Or HaChaim's kever or something, and the bulldozer that was traveling tumbled over. And it was a sign that, like, okay, we're not going to do this. And so the Rebbe, Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern, tells the Maisa that he heard from Rav Yosef Spinner, who's a tremendous Mekubal, that the bulldozer really turned over by Rav Menachem Mendel Mishklov. Didn't turn over by the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. That the Torah of Rav Menachem Mendel Mishklov, it's a Torah of Geula, because what it does is it takes the pashtus of his Rebbe the Gra and reveals the deepest depths in the world. It's kedai to read the Hakdama to the Bir HaGra on Mishlei, which was written by Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov, where we have the famous teaching that Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov tells us that he heard from his Rebbe that in order to understand Sod, a person has to understand Pshat. And that also in order to understand Pshat, a person has to understand Sod. And what the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, I believe, would simply point out is that's because Pshat and Sod are the same thing. But anyway, it's Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov's Yartzeit. And Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov says something incredible. I remember today, just bringing it back to Dan. I'm sorry for the tangent, Chevra, but it's a schus to talk about Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov. Schus Yogan Aleinu. So Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov is pointing out in his biur on the Idra in Kuf Ches, and he says as follows: after describing all of the good and wonderful things that happen to the Jewish people when they connect HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the depth of their mind and the depth of their heart on every level of experience, so he describes the experience of Dan. He describes the experience of the struggle. Uka asher eina mistavekes umisaleches ben hachayos. I'm sorry. And when a person is not connected, and when a person doesn't feel connected to that Yehuda experience, to that light, and walks amongst the beasts and danger, and lives in a place of separation. Nikres he. It's referred to as he. It's referred to as the feminine element of experience, of receptivity, of unconsciousness, of nighttime. It's not a state of wakefulness. And at this point, it's the beginning of the sighs of life, the sighing of life, the oivei of life, the dawn of life, that moment of struggle. of not knowing how I'm going to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shaira in my life right now. How am I going to uncover Hashras HaShechina right here, right now, that Hashem is with me in this moment, outside of the Anan, in the place that Amalek attacks. And so when we begin to sigh beside Oy Vai Hoy, Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov writes this out. Aleph, Vav, Chupchik Yud, Vav, Chupchik Yud, and Hey Vav, Chupchik Yud. I said Chupchik 3 times. I imagine that's going to... This Oy Vai Hoy. Oy Vai Hoy. That's the shirish of the Anacha. You're not going to believe this. Ki Einam es Kabelas Melamala, because it's not coming from above. Zakt the Be'er Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, who wrote a commentary on this sefer, and we're going to go back to his commentary on the Kutei Agra about Amalek in a second. Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver says on the word Melamala, when a person sighs, V'soid Gimel Tevos Hanal, the secret of these 3 words, Oy, Vai, and Hoy, Shesimanim Hu, which are the letters Hu, Hey, Vav, Aleph, the way to ascend back up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oy, Vai, Hoy. Oy, Vai, Hoy is the very mechanism that brings me back. Hu begematria Dan is the gematria 54. That the sigh of a yid when they're struggling and when they don't believe in their ability to get back up is the shirish of Machane Dan. That's where Lishuascha Kivisi Hashem comes from. That's the 54 times that it says Haman in the Megillah. That's the 54 letters in the 10 sons of Haman. That's the koyach of Amalek that comes to destroy, la'aveda sakol, to destroy everything, that Reish HaNachash, that comes to destroy everything and swallow everything whole. That place of Amalek, that place of descent in our lives, that place of oy vai hoy, as Rabbi Nachman would say, that the ikar shleimus hachisaron, the perfection of all lack, the best way to deal with lack in one's life and struggle is a good sigh. Oy. Because when you sigh, you breathe. And the way to move back upward, away from Amalek, is to breathe. Is that krech sakadusha. So anyway, that's a little bit on Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov. We'll speed up a little bit. So we had Rabbi Nachman's Perush on Amalek, which was the Sofia Tevos of Sheva Yipol Atzadik Bekam. And then we have the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon says that Amalek is Rosh Tevos Amram, Moshe, Levi, and Kahas. So backwards, right? It's Kahas. Well, it's not in order. It's not in order anyway, right? So it's Amram, Moshe, Levi, and Kahas. And it's Pashat that Amalek tries to do one of 2 things. To say that Moshe Rabbeinu is not really Moshe Rabbeinu, that it's tzaddik emes, that the tzaddikei hadoros, that the yechidi hadoros, that the true tzaddikim in their books and in our lives and in mitzius, and all of us our own tzaddik. Amalek comes to try and say that your tzaddik is not unique. Moshe Rabbeinu is not unique. Moshe Rabbeinu comes from somewhere, and Avad Moshe Rabbeinu comes from somewhere always, but Moshe Rabbeinu is more than what he comes from. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Nekud of Das. It's the Nekud of Mashiach in us. So Amalek tries to say, oh, you're so interested in Moshe, it really comes from Levi and Kahas and Amram. And it tries to minimize the singularity of our own experiences. And the other Pashat Pshat is that it comes to be Poigim in the Das of Moshe. Amalek goes directly for the deepest point in a person's life, to not believe in my Das, to not believe in my ability to connect with my mind, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be caught up in a place of disconnection. Amalek, we're told, is the opposite of Das. It is the disconnection that tries to convince us that when we fall, we're completely disconnected. And so for the Vilna Gaon, it's mashma that the koyach of being mevatel Amalek is the belief that me, that's Dan. Dan says, Liyishuascha kivisi Hashem, I am the one yearning for you. I believe that I could uncover my Nekud of Mashiach, my personal Geula. And the belief in that ability, the belief to uncover the Nekud of Das of Moshe within each and every one of us, the Nekud of entering into Binyan HaMishkan, to be Mevatel Amalek in that sense, is to believe in our Das of Moshe within us, is to believe in the essence of ourselves and our Emunah Pshuta. and that we can say to one another, Moshe Shapir Ka'amart, Moshe, you said good. What we didn't say last week, which I wanted to say, is that Rabbi Nachman says that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Nakuda of Moshe in all of us, that Nakuda that's in Uman, that place of Elyonim Lamata, V'Tachtonim Lamala, that's also in Yerushalayim, B'Vasachas, that place of Echad Shushtayim, that this Nakuda of Moshe is the gematria of 345, and it stands in between Shmad and Ratzon. That Moshe stands between heresy and desire. Almost to say as if the Nakuda of Moshe in us is stuck, is in between, is caught in the middle of, on the one end, I am so close to heresy, I am so close to denying it all and forgetting it all and being miyayish chas v'shalom. Yet at the very same moment, I am equally and as close to the Nakuda of Ratzon, to the highest possible experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in my life. So that Nakuda of Rava Deravin, I am always equidistant from the two, because be'emes, it's all Rava Deravin, it's all Ratzon. Even in the Shmad, as Rav Kook would tell us, that the deepest kfira in the world is simply a desire for more emunah. This koyach of Moshe, which stands between Shmad and Ratzon, it stands between those two polarities of our experience. If Amalek comes to be poigim in that, it tries to make us forget our ability to grapple both sides. One more nakuda on Amalek is what the tzaddikim say, that Amalek is safek, Amalek is doubt. And we spoke about this by Fabringen, but this nakuda of safek that Amalek comes to say, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu imayin, is Hashem with you or is he not? That place of a Jew falling away from the deepest belief that everything is good, that koyach of Rabbi Akiva, that koyach of Liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem, that koyach of being kicked out of the cloud, yet choosing to find my place specifically there and to elevate Kedusha and to return the lost goods to the Jewish people and to live with the koyach of a tzaddik in my life. That safek comes to be a mevatel that. But we already know that safek, as Rav Kook tells us, is also the shorish of sipuk, of satisfaction, and that the koyach of safek, the kedusha of Rosh Chodesh Adar, of the sveikos the radla, of those unknowable doubts, of the unknowable head, which is the Rosh Tevos of Adar. Adar is Reisha Lois Yada. That place of safek is the highest place of it all. As the Maggid of Kashnitz points out, that aseil charav v'tisalik min asafek, remove yourself from doubt. Zok the Maggid of Kashnitz, if you want to learn how to leave this world, to stop being so afraid and stop being so stuck on this world and enter into the inner interiority of the soul, that nekuda is going to only be through the kedusha of safek. Testalek, how do you want to remove yourself from the concealment of this world? Throw yourself into the world of safek, because hidden in the sveikos of emunah is the deepest opportunity to have more emunah and more emunah. And Be'ezrus Hashem, that's how we're mevatel the koyach of Amalek, to remember to forget and to forget to remember, and to believe that every second that even the Amalek in our lives and the Amalek in the world is ultimately contained within the deepest desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even Amalek is not outside of the realm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in truth, Amalek doesn't exist because the truest form of its holiness, as Rav Tzadok tells us, is the fact that it can't exist. Zakter Tzadok, that Amalek is a metzius she'ena b'metzius. It's a non-existent existence because it exists as something that has no spark of kedusha in it, and ultimately such a thing cannot exist, and therefore its survival is rooted in its very non-existence. There needs to be a perpetual erasure of it. The concept of Amalek is fixed when we realize that there's no such thing as Amalek. And we're mavatel it, and Rav Tzadok says this is the very same question as Yediyah and Bechira, and even he says, like the Rambam tells us, that ultimately it's trei hafachim b'noisa echad, it's two at one. It's two at one. That's the koyach of Dan and Yehuda, of Yad. A Yid is a Yud and a Dalit. It's a Yichud of Yehuda and Dan. The Nakuda of Kedusha, that's the Nakuda of Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef, who come announced by Saraya from the Shevet of Dan, who announces the arrival of Eliyahu Navi. Be'ezrus Hashem, by throwing ourselves into that safek to Kedusha, we remember that Amalek doesn't exist. We remember that everything is good, and that the deepest point of the safek in the world is ultimately just another opportunity for Mashiach. And in that way, a person lives their lives with Liyeshuascha kivisi Hashem. And we'll get Ezra Hashem. The next few weeks will be a similar theme, building up to Megillas Esther and Purim, Ezra Hashem.